Chapter 571. Huge Pressure. Audrey simply mentioned the ancient folk song, but she didn't describe the content in detail. She was afraid that the knowledgeable Ma'am Hermit would be able to guess at the exact location. She only mentioned the inspiration she had and how she used a psychological cue to retain her lucidity in her dream before beginning a magical journey.
Psychological cue? She knows how to plant a psychological cue? She's likely a Sequence 7 psychiatrist.
Catalea habitually made a judgment, but she immediately felt even more perplexed.
Then why would she be buying the beyonder characteristic of a psychiatrist? Taking the same potion gives a limited increase in strength while being prone to losing control. Furthermore, it will be an obstacle towards the digestion of the potion. To create a mystical item? But this will overlap with her own beyonder powers. There's no value to that. To give it to someone else?
Amidst Catlea's guesses, Audrey had already mentioned her chaotic dream and how she came to the edge of her conscious. Then, she used the conjuring method she learned from Mr. Fool to create a staircase that led downwards. She then slowly delved deep into her conscious. She didn't describe in detail the various points of light in her subconscious, as it involved embarrassing secrets she didn't wish to share. She focused on her lonely and long journey with no end in sight. She also expressed how there were various monsters hiding in the surrounding grayness that placed immense pressure on her. She mentioned how she nearly broke down several times and barely managed to endure it thanks to her beyonder powers. Then she reached the point of her finally arriving at the illusory sea of collective subconscious. The memory imprints of the human pioneers and the spread and reflection of the consciousness of the surrounding creatures were presented under Audrey's coherent and unhurried descriptions. Then it was fixed onto the dragon with grayish stone scales that had flown out from the sea of collective subconscious.
There's a dragon that lives in the sea of collective subconscious? What a magical and beautiful journey. Although Miss Justice didn't encounter any enemies or danger, it still leaves me a little surreal.
Forbes suddenly thought of a title of a book, Miss Justice's Dream Tour. While rounding things up, Audrey scanned the area and asked,
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any suggestions? Do you think that the Dragon City of Miracles live seed is also hidden in the sea of collective subconscious? If I wish to continue searching, what should I take note of? What advanced preparations do I need to make?
The hangman Alger glanced at the hermit and said in a serious tone,
I don't think you should continue exploring. It's a very dangerous act. According to the records, most dragons are creatures with flesh and blood. This includes the mind dragon. By allowing itself to survive and swim through the so-called sea of collective subconscious, it means that the dragon you saw was a sufficiently high sequence. At the very least, it's at the level of a demigod. Before you reach Sequence 5, it's best that you don't consider this.
Cattleya nodded and said,
There are many other dangerous things in the sea of collective subconscious. The accumulated maleficent thoughts of humanity, the desires that can corrupt soul bodies, the terrifying memories since ancient times that resemble storms and waves at sea. All of these will deal severe psychological harm to you. It might prevent you from ever waking up. Besides, that's the sea of collective subconscious of all creatures, which isn't only limited to humans. There might be evil spirits, evil gods, or the consciousness of some terrifying existence hidden in there. They're like gigantic maelstroms that can devour ships. Before you truly acquire beyonder powers that allow you to travel through the sea of collective subconscious, it's best not to rashly explore too deeply.
Audrey, who was filled with expectations, felt disappointed. However, she couldn't help but admit that Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit had spoken very logically and sincerely. She silently inhaled and said to herself,
Audrey, don't be headstrong. Wait till you're Sequence 5 before making the attempt again.
She totally didn't consider how difficult it was to become a Sequence 5. At that level, one could even compete to become one of the 7 pirate admirals, or even make the 7 become 8. From Audrey's point of view, with Mr. Fool and the Tarot Club, as long as she was careful and calm, she would definitely be able to successfully attain that level in a year or two if she didn't take unnecessary risks. Only the gate to being a demigod was hard to push open.
Ma'am Hermit knows a lot and is very knowledgeable.
Audrey clung onto the last sliver of hope and looked towards Mr. Fool at the end of the table, hoping that this godlike existence would provide a suggestion that was different from Mr. Hanged Man or Ma'am Hermit.
Don't look at me. I have no idea.
Klein tried his best not to blink. His understanding of the conscious, subconscious, and the collective subconscious was still stuck at a theoretical level that Spirit Medium Daily had described. He didn't understand anything more. Despite having his dreams intruded frequently, he had never thought of exploring the world outside the dream, despite retaining his lucidity. Therefore, how was he to provide any suggestions to Miss Justice? In fact, he had a natural idea regarding this. However, he wasn't sure if it would work without having done any verification. In the past, even if he lacked the confidence, he could vaguely make a comment, but now, with Admiral of Stars Ketuaya sitting at the side, watching, it only made it easier for him to make mistakes the more he spoke. The less he spoke, the fewer mistakes he would commit. And there was no chance of making mistakes by keeping silent.
What a pressure-inducing new member.
Klein sighed inwardly. He didn't say a word and maintained his faint smile. If not for him being above the gray fog and how he existed in the form of a spirit body, he suspected that such highly difficult acting would make the muscles around his eyes spasm.
Mr. Fool doesn't have any suggestions.
Audrey retracted her gaze in depression. She stopped fantasizing about exploring the sea of collective subconscious so soon. At this moment, the Moon Emlyn, who was already turning impatient, cleared his throat.
I have seriously researched the history handed down by us Sanguine.
Sanguine. He really is a vampire, nurturing vampires and pulling vampires into the church is really a tradition of the Church of Earth Mother. The moon directly expressed his identity. Does this mean that Mr. Fool has a potent deterrence, even in the outside world, that the members aren't afraid of information being leaked? It seems like I don't have to completely hide my circumstances.
Catalina nodded as she looked like she was listening seriously. Meanwhile, she felt that some of her conclusions needed adjustments. Emlyn paused and looked at the sun before tipping his chin.
Before the cataclysm, there was no City of Silver, only the Kingdom of Silver.
If it were anyone else who had thrown such doubt on him, Derek would have hastened to retort, expressing the fact that the people of the City of Silver were descendants of the Kingdom of Silver and that he hadn't lied. However, after glancing at Mr. Moon and sensing his smugness, Derek turned his head to the side, feeling that an explanation was beneath him. He thought silently to himself,
"Why must I let an arrogant vampire who doesn't acknowledge the City of Silver's history believe me?"
From his reaction, Emlyn could tell that the City of Silver was indeed related to the Kingdom of Silver, he, T-S-K-E-D, and said,
The faith of the Kingdom of Silver wasn't originally Giant King Ormir, but his queen, Omebella.
Omebella? Derek turned his head and blurted out,
Our City of Silver has no records of this matter, nor are there any records of a queen named Omebella.
Emlyn chuckled and spread out his hands.
That's why there's nothing wrong with me saying that your City of Silver's history is flawed and incomplete, right? Clearly, there are mistakes in your records of Sanguine history.
You took such a roundabout way to prove this. Should I say that a vampire like you has clear logic, or that you're someone who bears grudges?
Klein held back his laughter and stopped himself from sizing up Emlyn White. The moon and the sun's debate benefited him greatly, allowing him to know that the giant queen, the goddess of harvest, was named Omebella. The son Derek was just about to give a retort to Mr. Moon when he heard Ma'am Hermit speak.
Omebella is the goddess of harvest from the second epic. She's also the queen of the Giant King's court. Legend has it that she perished at the end of the second epoch, but it's impossible to verify since no one has seen her corpse or relics.
The goddess of harvest is really named Omebella.
Derek was stunned. He wished to retort, but he was unable to say a word as this matter proved that the history of the City of Silver had several holes. He instantly felt somewhat aggrieved. When Emlyn saw this, he felt good. Pleasure rose from the depths of his heart. After another round of exchanges, the tarot gathering came to an end. Klein smiled and said,
Everyone, we shall meet next week.
By your will.
Audrey immediately got up to bow. The others weren't any slower, including the hermit Cattleya. Upon returning to reality, Admiral of Stars Cattleya looked at the shattered celestial globe on her desk. She then seriously recalled what had happened at the gathering. A few details made her believe that the Tarot Club involved itself in many matters that made it nothing to scoff at. And hidden deep in the gray fog was Mr. Fool. Like the world, who was hidden behind thick shadows, he was unreadable and unfathomable. It was unknown what he was planning. After more than 10 seconds of silence, Cattleya retrieved a pen and some paper and wrote while deliberating.
Someone has been deliberately collecting the Emperor's diary pages.
She didn't dare to expose any information that involved the Tarot Club, as she was afraid of being punished by Mr. Fool. All she could do was give a heads up on things that could be discovered under ordinary circumstances. After she was done writing and folding the letter, she took out a golden, exquisite harmonica she carried with her. Putting it to her lips, she blew it. In the blink of an eye, she saw the letter strangely vanish. Even though she wasn't wearing her glasses, she was unable to discover the arrival of the messenger, Korai, Bushorfi, Pooh. Cattleya sighed and reached for her forehead and said silently,
The pressure is really huge when participating in a gathering while under the supervision of a god.
With Admiral of Stars joining, the pressure on me as the Fool has greatly increased.
Klein rubbed his temples above the gray fog and directly returned to the real world. He wanted to attempt the inspiration Miss Justice had received from exploring her dreams. Chapter 572, Recite My Name. After a series of chores, Klein opened his locked bedroom door and looked into the living room. He saw Danitz sleeping soundly on a reclining chair. Although he had long heard it, Klein couldn't help but lampoon.
It's not even 4 in the afternoon. Has this guy completely let his hair down now that he doesn't need to monitor the radio transceiver?
With a thought, he gradually smiled, feeling that this was exactly what he needed. The premise of him maintaining his lucidity in dreams had involved someone invading his consciousness. Typically, his dreams were a turbid mess, which meant that he alone wasn't able to complete the experiment. After all, he couldn't plant a psychological cue on himself. Therefore, he planned on using external forces to enter the dreams of others. This way, he could maintain his lucidity like a nightmare. He originally planned on heading out to find a suitable target, but Danitz's posture was in such a perfect state that he could hardly stop himself from kicking him.
No, I should be experimenting.
Klein corrected his thoughts. He contemplated for a moment and didn't use a dream charm. As a Sequence 7 pyromaniac, with the ancient name being Fire Mage, Danitz's spiritual perception wasn't to be written off. Once he softly chanted an incantation that could stir the powers of nature, Danitz would definitely be awoken. As such, it would be a question of whether he could evade the matter in a timely fashion. After some deliberation, Klein took out another thing he had prepared. It was a gem-like object that seemed dark and deep. It was the Beyonder characteristic, left behind by a nightmare. It could be used to a certain extent, just like marionettist Rosago's all-black eye. However, the effects were inferior to one that was from a mystical item. For example, this nightmare Beyonder characteristic didn't allow Klein to pass through the dreams of someone across the city from his inn's suite, nor was he able to forcefully pull people into a dream. However, it was still simple enough to perform the most basic form of intruding into someone's dream at a close distance. Klein held the dark gem and spread out his spirituality. The illusory darkness rapidly spread before his eyes, filling his vision. Everything before his eyes were blanketed over, including Danitz. There was no longer a humanoid figure, but an ellipsoidal blob of light. Klein immediately extended his spirituality out and made contact with it. Without any warning, various scenes flooded his surroundings as they flashed rapidly. Finally, it came to stop on a ship that was dozens of meters long. It had a smoke-churning chimney and large sails that were fully raised. The deck was polished abnormally bright, shimmering with the glimmer of a gold coin when sunlight hit it. Dennett stood under the main cannon as he had his arms crossed. He was leisurely rushing the sailors, shouting from time to time,
Scrub that area again. Dogsh asterisk T. Do you wish to copy down the ancient Faceac dictionary?
This fellow is quite impressive on the Golden Dream.
Klein ignored the owner of the dream and flew to the other end of the ship. He found a hidden spot and landed on the deck before preparing to test his spiritual perception. What he planned on experimenting on was simple. He wanted to know if chanting the fool's honorific name in a dream was effective. He wanted to know if he could sense someone praying. This way, if Miss Justice encounters danger in the sea of collective subconscious, she can use this method to seek help. After stretching his back, Klein's expression gradually turned solemn as he softly said,
The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck.
With the words in Hermes being spoken, he very quickly finished reciting the fool's honorific name. However, Klein didn't hear the series of illusory pleas.
It doesn't work.
Klein frowned in thought. He analyzed whether it was really impossible or if he had made a mistake somewhere.
Yes, chanting in the dream doesn't actually produce any noise. Relying on Hermes alone isn't sufficient. To achieve the effects of praying, I'll have to use a language like ancient Hermes that can stir the powers of nature. This is the same state as me copying the account password of my anonymous account.
Klein nodded slightly and began to chant his honorific name in ancient Hermes. He wasn't afraid that there would be an accident, but that his stirring of the powers of nature would wake blazing Dannets from his sleep. He recited each word, quickly finishing the 3 sentences. Following that, Klein heard the stacked series of irritable and illusory pleas. At that moment, Dannets' dream quivered as the golden dream quickly disintegrated. Klein didn't stay any longer and immediately left. He returned back to his bedroom before Dannets woke up. After 7 to 8 seconds, Dannets sat up in a daze as he muttered to himself in fear.
Why did I dream of that madman Gairman Sparrow causing trouble on the Golden Dream? What a terrifying matter. Dogsh asterisk T. It must be the result of me worrying over this matter all this time.
Inside the bedroom, Klein had already taken 4 steps counterclockwise and gone above the gray fog. Without any surprises, he saw a rippling light by the fool's high-back chair. In it was the scene of him in the dream.
It really works. One can still receive a response when chanting the fool's honorific name in languages such as ancient Hermes or Jotun. It's no wonder some people might suddenly die in their sleep despite not doing a thing. They might be reading some materials or had memorized certain symbols in the day and accidentally replicated them in the dream. The danger in this world really cannot be prevented.
Klein dispelled the rippling light and considered if he should inform Miss Justice of the results of the experiment.
To only inform her later instead of saying it on the spot is a little damaging to the fool's image. But Miss Justice is the kind of girl with a huge sense of curiosity. Although she has been warned by Mr. Hanged Man and Admiral of Stars, and even if she's a little more mature now, there's still the chance of her taking risks. Of course, if anything were to happen, it's on herself, and it has nothing to do with me.
Klein couldn't help but recall Miss Justice's adoration of the fool and the thought of her optimism and cheerfulness that brought him happiness, as well as her contributions towards the Tarot Club all this time. Finally, he sighed and said in a self-deprecating manner,
I still need to inform her and give a warning. This is the treatment a VIP gets.
After making the decision, Klein didn't hesitate to spread out his spirituality to touch the crimson star representing Miss Justice. In a room of the huge manor in Eastchester County, Audrey had her legs leaning sideways as she sat before her dressing table. She was recalling the words Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit had said. After being warned by 2 senior Beyonders, she suddenly realized something. It wasn't that the mid and upper echelons of the psychology alchemists wasn't aware that one could explore dreams, the icy mountain of the subconscious, and the sea of collective subconscious by using a self-induced psychological cue.
The reason why they didn't tell me anything is because it's too dangerous for a psychiatrist. Many people have already died in such explorations. But they should warn me. Ah, right. From their point of view, I'm only a sequence 8 telepathist. I'm not equipped with the powers of a psychological cue, so there was no need to warn me.
Audrey finally understood the perplexing matter. Just as she was about to let Susie enter the room to calm the disappointment in her heart, she suddenly saw thick gray fog spew out, instantly flooding her vision. In the middle of the endless, grayish white, a figure sat in a high-backed chair. Looking down at her, it said,
Do not make attempts without careful consideration.
Before Audrey realized what was happening, she heard the deep and majestic voice sound out again.
If you encounter dangers in your dreams, you can recite my name.
Recite your name?
Audrey's eyes widened as she became overjoyed.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Seeing that Miss Justice was excited instead of showing any doubts, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled.
Use ancient Hermes.
With that said, his figure faded away and the gray fog vanished. Audrey sat there stunned for 2 seconds before hurriedly pursing her lips, afraid that she wasn't on her best behavior.
Mr. Fool actually specially warned me. He even permitted me to recite his name in my dream.
Audrey excitedly took a few steps on the spot, believing that she had really become a blessed of God. Of course, she also remembered Mr. Fool's warning. She planned to understand more from the psychology alchemists and make another attempt only when she was sufficiently prepared. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly as she randomly tapped her chest, saying silently,
May Mr. Fool watch over me tilde.
Above the gray fog, Klein began to consider another matter.
Red-haired Helene, who had a reward worth 1,000 pounds, was actually related to Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. Tracy took over Quilangos' crew and changed his flagship to the Black Death. As for Quilangos, he previously plundered a tycoon named Jimmy Necker. That tycoon had previously obtained parts of Death's chronicles. It came from a Balam royal family's mausoleum. This information came from that nightmare inside creeping hunger. It should benefit Mr. Azek to a certain extent. I can also investigate the matter in passing.
Klein found another reason to look forward to finding red-haired Helene. He originally planned on using the magic mirror, or Rhodes, to find her, but now he planned on mobilizing sea god believers to perform a search.
In the past, it's quite demeaning to send a revelation for just 1,000 pounds. But now that it involves a pirate admiral, it can barely make people guess that there are secret motives behind it.
Klein conjured red-haired Helene's photo and summoned the sea god scepter. He had never done a mass revelation, so it was possible that it would be a burden that he couldn't withstand. He chose higher-ups like Kalat and Edmonton. With waves reaching high into the sky as a background, he said in a deep voice,
Find her and protect her. Be careful of Tracy's forces.
Klein didn't provide further explanations as he broke down this scene along with red-haired Helene's photo into many sets before projecting them into the corresponding dots of light. Chapter 573, Teaching a Lesson in Reality, in a forest in Blue Mountain Island where the resistance base was located. Sitting in a wheelchair, Kalat raised his bald head and looked towards the sunlight that was scattering at the cave's entrance. His eyes couldn't hide his joy. He acutely sensed that ever since God reappeared over the land and stated his 10 commandments, the previous bloodshed and chaos had changed. From time to time, he would provide them with guidance which was filled with wisdom. Furthermore, he would observe all creatures and proactively interfere with the situation at sea in a bid to help the resistance and everyone in Rorstead, allowing them to pass through a difficult, thorny path while still being able to see some hope. Kalat recalled the revelation he had just received and guessed that
perhaps this is the true meaning behind his reappearance over the land. The red-haired woman named Helene was like a fulcrum for Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy and the forces out at sea. She was the key to spoiling the balance between the countries, and only by making the world situation more chaotic would the people of Rorstead receive the opportunity of being liberated.
Colette drew in a breath and quickly set up a ritual to pray to Sea God, conjuring Helene's picture. After doing all of this, he instinctively turned his head to the side and wore a somewhat mixed expression. Living in that direction was the high priest of the Church of Sea God, a priest who was a high-ranking member of the resistance. Colette couldn't hide the smile in his heart while he felt a strong sense of anguish. He thought,
Although they don't dare go against the revelations and have made tremendous changes, in many ways they're still immersed in the past. They're obstinate, conservative, backward, and savage. They refuse to embrace a more civilized church. If this goes on, they'll one day be abandoned by God.
After scanning through all the believers' prayers and picking a few to respond to, Klein returned to the real world. He planned on heading out to search for a chance to enact true acting. When his right hand gripped the door handle, a ridiculous but possible thought came to his mind.
My true goal is not to find red-haired Helene, but to use this opportunity to get to Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy and figure out what happened to Tycoon Jimmy Necker, so as to get to know the location of the ancient chronicles of death. That is to say, I only need to lure Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy out with red-haired Helene. As for whether she's the real person or not, that doesn't matter. I can make myself red-haired Helene and let Danitz send me to Strongman Ozil, get the reward, and easily meet Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. What an impressive sequence of actions.
Klein suddenly shook his head as he found a reason to reject the idea.
Although I'm a faceless, I can't accept wearing drag. Could it be that overcoming my inner resistance is also one of the principles for acting? Furthermore, I don't know red-haired Helene. Acting as her wouldn't work. I would just be like her on the surface, and I wouldn't be able to fool people who are familiar with her. That way, I won't be able to meet Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. Yes. The person searching for red-haired Helene might not be Tracy, but an enemy of hers. I don't know Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy's background. Rashly doing such an act would result in immeasurable danger. It's best to be safe and abide by my wishes. I'll first search for red-haired Helene, and after determining the details, I can consider the subsequent actions.
At that moment, Klein suddenly felt that something was amiss in the living room. Danitz's snoring had softened, and the time between each snore shortened. He thought,
Vice Admiral Iceberg is here?
Klein turned the handle and opened the door to the bedroom. While making this silent action, Danitz sat up with his eyes open. He tried hard to hide his smile as he said,
Captain came. She said that Admiral of Blood's crew was sighted at Longtail Island and is continuing south. His destination seems to be the Berserk Sea. The source of the news is trustworthy.
Klein felt pangs of regret and could only lament how reality changed faster than his plans. He thought,
Longtail Island? The island at the southern end of the Rorstead Sea? From the looks of it, Admiral of Blood previously planned on coming to Bayam, but the fight between Kalvitua and Sea King John Cotman scared him away. He circled around the area and headed straight for the Berserk Sea. Yes, it's probably because his intelligence officer, Old Quinn, didn't send a telegram to inform him.
He had planned to make his hunt of Admiral of Blood become the crowning battle of the crazy adventurer and bounty hunter, Gehrman Sparrow. He thought,
killing a single steel Moretti ultimately lacks that shock and awe effect.
Klein didn't say a word as he calmly looked at Danitz. Danitz felt a little uneasy from the intense stare as he gave a hollow chuckle.
Admiral of Blood has fled. Your cooperation with Captain has come to an end, right? I can now return to the Golden Dream, right? Further developments can be done via your messenger.
Klein pondered for a moment and took out a piece of paper from his pocket. He scribbled the method to summon his messenger. Following that, he flicked his wrist, sending the piece of paper out like a metallic plate. Danitz was a hunter at Sequence 9, so he easily reached out and caught the piece of paper. He scanned it before a scarlet flame rose in his palms, burning the paper to ashes.
Haha, even if I forget it, Captain will have a way of making me recall it.
He paused and squeezed out a smile before asking again.
I can now return to the Golden Dream, right?
Klein nodded slightly and said,
Yes.
I can.
Danitz held back his urge to pump his fist in celebration, afraid that he would end up antagonizing the madman, Gehrman Sparrow. He smiled cautiously and said,
I'll first pay off the room for this period of time and buy a ship ticket. As you know, Bayham hasn't been calm recently. Captain doesn't wish for the Golden Dream to dock at the harbor here.
Klein didn't say a word as he maintained his austere attitude. He thought,
At least you know how to settle the room's payment.
He draped himself with a coat and took his hat before walking towards his luxurious suite. When his back disappeared into the corner of a staircase and vanished from Danitz's sight, Danitz shrank back into his room and clenched his fist, pumping them into the air.
Wonderful! Wonderful! I'm finally free.
He didn't delay in wearing his cap and heading to the front desk of the Wind of Azure Inn to settle the bill. He informed them that this didn't mean that he was checking out. Danitz quickly hit the streets and ran straight for a place known as the Seaweed Bar. He found the air fresh and invigorating. After he took a few steps, he suddenly noticed bounty posters pasted along the walls around a bend. The poster read, Blazing Danitz, 5,500 pounds. The posters were just 2 steps away from Danitz. That familiar face allowed for a clear comparison with his cap-wearing face. Danitz clenched his teeth and revealed a sorrowful smile. He hurriedly pressed down his cap, nearly concealing his normal line of sight. But even so, he still felt uneasy. He went to a recent department store and bought a gray scarf. He wrapped it around his neck and hid his nose and mouth in it. At this point in time, Danitz relaxed somewhat as he sped up his pace and rushed for his destination. The Seaweed Bar was a place where gangs gathered. It was common for infamous pirates to appear there. Although this place wasn't like the Swordfish Bar or Amiris Leaf Bar that allowed access to a lot of information and resources, it had its own unique niche. It had many resourceful, secret channels. What Danitz wanted to do was buy a scalped ticket to Galagos, as this wouldn't need him to provide any identification. He knew very well that, be it in the past or present, his bounty poster would be plastered across all the ticket booths. He had bought the first-class tickets to the White Agate via the same method as well. After entering the bar, Danitz didn't take off his cap and scarf. He carefully surveyed the area and found Daniil, who sold scalped tickets. He didn't directly approach him, and instead retracted his gaze from the thin and somewhat swarthy man who was in his 30s. He began searching for someone unfamiliar. After a round of choices, Danitz squeezed through the crowd and arrived beside a lad who was drinking at the bar counter. He tapped him on the shoulder and suppressed his voice.
Do me a favor.
What?
The lad turned his head warily and ended up seeing a suspicious man. The lower half of his face was covered in a gray scarf and the cap on his head nearly hid his eyes. He revealed almost nothing about his face. Such a dress-up simply meant that he was suspicious. This was because the Rorstad archipelago's lowest temperature during the winter was about 10 degrees Celsius. Danitz pointed at Daniil.
See that guy over there? Buy me a ticket for Galagos tomorrow.
He handed over 3 one-pound notes and chuckled.
The rest is yours.
Although a scalp ticket was much more expensive than a retail ticket, Galagos wasn't too far, making £3 more than sufficient. Of course, this was also because the journey was relatively shorter, and there was no need for him to buy a first-class ticket. The reason why Danitz didn't buy it himself was because he was worried that Daniil would recognize him, bringing him unwanted trouble. Back when his bounty was only £3,000, pirates and adventurers at his level or lower had to consider how many people were needed to take him down. The bounty received wasn't something that could make them forget about their fear towards Vice Admiral Iceberg and the risk of losing their lives. Hence, very few people would take the initiative to attack him. As such, his safety was pretty much guaranteed in such black markets. Ease Coney. But now his bounty reward had already reached £5,500. Even if several people joined forces, the amount of money each of them could get was a sizable sum. Furthermore, there were many people out at sea who were desperados. Apart from that, there would be people who found their own bounties too low and wished to prove their strength. These people would definitely challenge a target like Danitz, who was infamous but was of little risk. It was precisely because of this that Danitz was afraid that Daniil would betray him. Therefore, he hired a random person to buy it on his behalf. The lad held the cash and gave Danitz another look before getting up from his seat. He then walked towards Daniil. He deliberately slowed down his footsteps when he walked past some drunkards as he whispered to them. When Danitz saw this scene, he suddenly became guarded. He thought of a problem. With him acting suspiciously, it was very obvious that there was a problem with him. He was a perfect target for being betrayed. He thought,
Do you think my reputation as blazing was bought?
Danitz planned on teaching the lad a lesson after he obtained the ticket. At this point, he discovered that a familiar figure had walked in. He was an infamous pirate, Blue Eyes Meath, with a bounty of 2,800 pounds, and this pirate clearly knew this group of people were planning to betray him. He thought,
Blue Eyes Meath still has a few rather powerful subordinates.
Danitz didn't hesitate to get up and head for the bar's back door. His speed increased as he agilely forced himself through the drunkards and escaped from the bar. Then, with his rich anti-tracking skills, he completely escaped from the group of people. Danitz didn't dare to stay on the streets since it was already dark. The patrolling police and soldiers would begin increasing. He went straight back to the Wind of Azure Inn and opened the door to the luxurious suite. Inside, he saw Gehrman Sparrow admiring the dusk. Danitz had a thought as he forced a smile.
There's something, I forgot to mention it just now. Captain wishes to ask if you have any interest in meeting her at Galagos?
This was a question he had previously kept secret. He had planned on returning and telling his captain that Gehrman Sparrow wasn't interested. But now he realized that he had a low chance of surviving in Bayam once he was separated from the crazy adventurer. Chapter 574, Fail to Accomplish. Head to Galagos to meet Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards? Klein was taken aback, nearly frowning in the process. This wasn't something he considered unacceptable, but instead a chance for him to use this face-to-face meeting to ask about matters with trite details that were cumbersome to pen down. It was possible for him to be inspired and gain information for his subsequent advancement in high-sequence potion formulas. Klein silently muttered.
One more friend, one more channel.
Before taking out a heavy gold coin, he divined if there was any danger in front of blazing Danitz. The shiny gold coin flipped into the air and tumbled down into Klein's palm, tails facing up. This implied a negative response, which meant that there wasn't much danger meeting Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina in Galagos. Klein shifted his gaze upwards at Danitz and calmly said,
Okay.
On the captain's behalf, I thank you for accepting the invitation.
Danitz heaved a sigh of relief and beamed, his brows easing. Klein took a look at the wall clock and said,
I'll first head to the washroom.
Danitz's gaze followed Gehrman Sparrow's body as he sharply read in between the lines.
Head to the washroom? You mean you plan on heading out later to buy a ticket for me?
After using spirit dowsing to confirm things above the gray fog, Klein washed his hands and left the washroom and said to Danitz,
Let's go.
Me?
Danitz pointed at himself. Klein put on his coat and nodded.
There's no need to, right? You can directly find Elland and get him to help us buy 2 tickets.
In this rare occasion, Danitz sincerely provided a suggestion. Klein coldly swept his glance across him and didn't say a word. He wore his hat and went out the door. BM. Danitz trembled and swallowed his second suggestion of buying fake identification documents and use Gehrman Sparrow's ability to change appearances to buy 2 tickets via official channels. He wrapped the scarf around him once again and pressed down on his cap before quickly following Gehrman Sparrow. After nearly 20 minutes, Klein pointed ahead where there was a noisy commotion.
Is it there?
That was the seaweed bar where Danitz had failed to accomplish the purchase of scalped tickets.
Yes.
Danitz never expected them to circle over and was momentarily stunned. Along the way, he had roughly described his early experience. Therefore, he wasn't sure why Gehrman Sparrow would return here. Amid his thought, he suddenly had a guess as he blurted,
Are you going to seek revenge for me?
Danitz couldn't help but reflect on the matter.
This fella might be crazy, but he's quite nice to his friends. His act of venturing out into Banzi Harbor for Elend and the others is an example.
Klein shot him a glance and didn't say a word. He widened his strides and walked into the seaweed bar.
There's really no need.
Danitz followed behind as he weakly persuaded him. To him, if he wasn't afraid of escalating the matter, he would have baked those bunch of backstabbing bastards in cement and sank them to the bottom of the sea. The bar was noisy and lively, with local music reverberating through it, bringing about a trance-like feeling. Danitz seriously surveyed the area in an attempt to find the bunch of backstabbers, as well as the infamous pirate, Blue Eyes Meath.
That's Daniil.
Danitz casually introduced the black market merchant. He thought, with some regret.
What a pity that this place is just too chaotic. I have no idea if that group of people are still around.
Klein traced his gaze and touched creeping hunger with his right hand. He turned his head and looked at Danitz, saying with his usual expression,
Take off your scarf.
His tone was akin to instructing Danitz to buy a glass of beer.
Ah?
Danitz was left stunned on the spot as he wondered if he had heard wrong. Klein widened the ends of his mouth and said,
Take off your scarf. Do not make me repeat thrice.
Danitz choked back his question under the icy cold and crazy stare.
Why?
He blankly removed his scarf in puzzlement, and he had a baffling feeling that the people around him were sizing him up and also recognizing him as the great pirate worth 5,500 pounds, Blazing Danitz. Klein maintained his smile that concealed madness and continued instructing.
Take off your cap. Shome. Go over and buy a ticket.
In an instant, Danitz felt as though he had been struck by lightning. He nearly leaped up.
I'll be recognized.
Under Gehrman Sparrow's stare, his voice became softer and softer. Eek. At this point in time, he had already understood what Gehrman Sparrow was up to. Danitz kept cursing inwardly with vulgarities.
He wishes to use my worth as 5,500 pounds as bait to fish out those greedy pirates and powerhouses behind those gangs. Dog shit. To think I thought he was nice to his friends a moment ago. No, why would I even consider him my friend? This son of a bitch.
He couldn't put up any resistance since he knew how crazy Gehrman Sparrow was.
This was a madman who was even thinking of hunting a pirate admiral.
Danitz revealed a twisted smile. As he slowly turned his head back, he took off his cap and slowly walked towards Daniil. Nakiyem. Around him, gazes swept past him and paused for 2 seconds before they were retracted. As the drunkards moved away from him like the receding tide, they opened a wide path for him, as though the ocean was split. Upon seeing their reaction, Danitz was surprised at this turn of events, despite his horror and concerns.
This is the might of a great pirate? This is what it feels like to be the center of attention? Damn it, I heard someone say my name. Someone is whispering Blazing.
Danitz knew he had been recognized. As he walked forward anxiously, he hung his hands down and prepared to do battle. Among the crowd, Blue Eyes Meath blurted out,
Danitz? Blazing Danitz!
His subordinates exchanged looks and said excitedly,
Boss, it's really Blazing Danitz. 5,500 pounds. Shall we attack?
Meath narrowed his azure blue eyes and raised his left arm, slapping the back of his subordinate's head.
You stupid ass. If Blazing Danitz were a stupid ass like you, he would have been killed numerous times. He dared to appear here because he's not afraid of being attacked. He has a powerhouse hiding behind him?
Meath suddenly felt horrified as he looked around. He suspected that Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards had secretly arrived in the City of Generosity, Byam. Through the gaps in between the crowd, he saw a young gentleman in a black double-breasted frock coat. He wore a half-top hat and had black hair and brown eyes. He looked thin, but he had an angled face. Or, without any words, Meath's spiritual perception told him that this was a terrifying existence. His high spiritual perception had previously brought him numerous troubles, but it had also helped him successfully evade even more dangers. He suppressed his voice as he ordered.
Let's go!
Then, with the help of the patrons blocking him, he fled from the bar's back door, just like how Danitz did previously. Danitz came right in front of Daniil while shuddering in fear before buying 2 tickets to Galagos from a blank and horrified opponent. Even after he returned the way he came and received the signal from Guillermin Sparrow to walk out the bar, he didn't notice anyone suddenly assaulting him.
Isn't it said that there are many desperados among pirates? Indeed, a last-minute and rushed trap is hardly effective. Something abnormal usually implies that something is amiss. Of course, one can use the abnormality to scare the enemy. Unfortunately.
Klein pressed down on his hat before following Danitz out. At that moment in time, Danitz was loitering around a street lamp. When he saw Guillermin Sparrow walk out, he barely smiled and said,
Can I wear the scarf and cap already? Haha, that group of cowards.
Yes.
Klein didn't stop as he sped up once he reached the other end of the street. Danitz's pupils contracted as he hurriedly chased after him and inquired,
Why are we suddenly running?
Klein didn't turn his head as he calmly said,
Do you wish to stay here to be invited back by the mandated punishers?
As he spoke, he took out a paper figurine, threw it out, and burned it to ashes. Only then did Danitz snap to his senses. Although that group of cowards didn't dare to attack him, they definitely had the courage to report him. If he was successfully taken down, they still had a chance of receiving parts of the reward. They ran all the way into a secluded alley before Guillermin Sparrow stopped. Only then did Danitz have the time to wrap his scarf properly and wear his cap. Danitz asked with a slight pant.
Where are we heading now?
Klein glanced at him.
Find Elend.
The corners of Danitz's mouth twitched, yearning to throw a fireball over.
To buy tickets to the Delineus Island.
Klein added as he passed through the alley. Delineus Island was the first island past the south of the Rorstad archipelago.
Right, there's a ship there that heads for Galagos. Now, with everyone's attention focused on the liners from Byam to Galagos, no one would imagine that we'd take a detour to Delineus Island and travel from there.
Danitz followed as he was enlightened. On Tuesday morning, Klein personally helped Danitz don a disguise, making him look like a mixed blood who wore gold-rimmed glasses. Although there was no way to use his faceless powers, it was still at least 10 times better than Danitz's own attempts at disguising himself. They successfully boarded the ship and prepared to head south to Delineus Island Harbor. The journey was expected to take 10 hours. Whoosh! The liner left the harbor and steered into the sea. Under the bright sunlight, thin clouds, and blue skies, this hybrid-powered ship silently sailed through the gentle waves amid the cold breeze, all the way into the afternoon. At this moment, Klein was inside the cabin, pondering over some content in the Book of Secrets. Danitz was pacing about, thinking about how he could brag to his mates. Suddenly, their vision darkened as though a cloud had drifted over to blot out the sun. Klein subconsciously looked out and saw that a gigantic pitch-black sailboat had appeared at some moment in time. It was nearly 100 meters long and had its sail fully opened. By the side were rows of cannons. Before it approached, it steered in a different direction, but it still made the surroundings seem to have a black sun pass by. Danitz revealed a reverent and apprehensive expression that was mixed with a longing but abhorrent look. He hissed before whispering in a dreamy manner.
Black Emperor.
Chapter 575, Golden Dream. Upon seeing the gigantic black sailboat, Klein's first reaction was fear and wariness. He suspected that the demigod, king of the 5 seas Nast, was here for him. But he quickly refuted that guess. This was because, apart from using the Black Emperor card in the spirit world, he had nearly never made the card of blasphemy appear in the real world ever since he came out to sea. There were only 2 or 3 times when they appeared due to a summoning before it quickly entered the spirit world.
With the Grey Fog screening abilities and the Card of Blasphemy's anti-divination and anti-prophecy traits, it's impossible for Nast to lock onto me.
Klein calmed down as he got up to walk towards the window. Together with Danitz, he looked at the Black Emperor, which defied sailboat logic. The gigantic ship slowly approached in the massive shadows as the scene on the deck became increasingly clear. The sailors were either washing the deck or bragging on the shipboard. None of them had drawn their cutlasses or guns. There was no sign of them planning to plunder the ship. Kiem. Near the cabin, there was a mottled stone chair that was 2 to 3 meters high. On it sat a colossal man that was comparable to a giant. Before he could take in Nast's appearance, Danitz couldn't help but lower his head as his body became numb and trembled, to the point of prostrating himself. Klein also sensed the inexplicable sense of might and awe. He didn't forcibly resist it to keep his head up and continue looking at Nast. This had a high chance of attracting his attention, bringing him unwanted trouble. As a person with many secrets, he had to bow his head when required. Klein retracted his gaze as he admired the rugs on the deck. After an unknown period of time, he saw the sunlight illuminate the area again as the shadow vanished. He looked up and could no longer see the gigantic pitch-black sailboat. The wind and seas were calm, and the skies were clear. Danitz frowned as he muttered to himself in puzzlement.
Why would he suddenly be here? Wasn't it said that he was still at the Fog Sea recently?
Klein thought to himself.
That Black Emperor can cruise through the spirit world, so it's very normal for it to come all the way from the Fog Sea in a span of a few days. This is also probably one of the reasons why Nast is the greatest of the 4 kings.
He believed that Nast was lured by the Black Emperor card, but it was likely that Nast could only determine a vague area. Klein retracted his gaze and sat back down as though nothing had happened. The straight-line distance between Bayham and Delineus wasn't great, but a sufficiently safe sea route was filled with twists and turns, so it took the liner until sunset before it reached the dock. After that, Klein changed his appearance and used a fake identity to buy 2 early tickets and set off before it got dark. They arrived at Gargus at dawn. Danitz didn't enter the city and instead brought Klein on a detour to a private harbor. They then took a simple fishing boat and set off to sea. After nearly 2 hours, Klein saw a sailboat which was dozens of meters long. It was clean and produced a golden luster from the sunlight reflected on it. Compared to similar sailboats, it appeared extremely special. Along the central axis was the main cannon, which was stacked with symbols and patterns. Faint but pure light swirled around it. Danitz introduced smugly.
That's the cannon of purification. It can only be used 10 times before 6 priests of light are needed to hold a ritual. They will pray to the corresponding deity to fill it up with spirituality.
Klein remained stoic as he mumbled inwardly.
A gigantic version of a charm? After a certain period of time, it will likely automatically lose its spirituality. Backing Vice Admiral Iceberg is the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, or one that can nurture priests of light.
Back when he first saw the Golden Dream in Danitz's dream, he wasn't too surprised by the main cannon. After all, dreams didn't need to adhere to logic. Perhaps Danitz had seen an ironclad warship and its main cannon had left a deep impression on him, causing him to reproduce it in his dream. To Klein's surprise, the Golden Dream really had something that required extremely copious amounts of knowledge and mysticism. It wasn't something an ordinary faction could produce. Soon, the Golden Dream dispatched a dinghy and quickly steered towards the fishing boat. Danitz spread his hands open before clenching them tightly. He then jumped down and landed in the dinghy without causing it to shake. Haskell. He whistled and struck palms with the pirate who was steering. He found the former feeling of ruling over the ocean again. However, this excitement didn't last long, as the dinghy behind him suddenly dipped a little. One more person had joined them. Danitz wiped away his smile and sat down.
I forgot about that madman.
Klein observed the pirates and pressed down his hat. He sat down calmly without a word. Before long, he landed on the deck of the Golden Dream and saw Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards standing in silence. This pirate admiral was nearly identical to how she looked when they met in the dream. There weren't any changes to her hair or looks. She now wore dark trousers with a pair of leather boots instead of wearing a dress. She also had a valiant bearing to her wisdom and beauty.
She's more like a pirate this time than a teacher.
Klein nodded gently and smiled politely.
Good morning, man, Captain.
Edwina replied with a smile.
Good morning, Mr. Gehrman.
She turned around and walked to a spot where fishing nets were being hung out to dry. She signaled the pirates to walk away and get busy with their own work.
Fishing nets. As expected of a pirate crew that's more like treasure hunters. This is in preparation to improve their meals?
Klein followed in silence. Danitz very naturally found a few of his companions he was most familiar with to have drinks and to brag to. Of course, he didn't let down his guard. From time to time he would glance over, afraid that his captain would end up exchanging blows with Gehrman Sparrow. He was ready to get his companions to join the brawl at any moment. This time, Klein didn't wait for Edwina to explain why she had invited him. After 2 seconds of silence, he asked,
What do you know of Tracy?
He planned on asking all his questions before listening to Edwina's motives. He wanted to prevent himself from being embarrassed to ask further after rejecting a request he couldn't agree to. Edwina's eyes quivered a little.
Tracy? She's a demoness, a Sequence 5 demoness of affliction.
Demoness?
Klein nearly lost it. He felt that his fate seemed to be intertwined with demonesses. First, it was Witch Trissy, and then there was Demoness of Pleasure, Madame Sharon, and then there was Demoness of Pleasure Trissy Cheek, and a high-ranking demoness he only heard the voice of. Now there was another Demoness of Affliction, Tracy. Edwina didn't sense the upheavals he was going through and continued.
She's different from the typical demoness. She has her own ideals and pursuits. She's quite an oddity in the demoness sect. However, she would still work for the organization, doing work such as human trafficking or something else.
Klein suddenly thought of red-haired Helene.
Different from the typical demoness? She doesn't give up on herself and chooses to give pleasure to women?
However, he couldn't be certain because not every demoness was the result of a man changing into a woman. There were real women who wished to become an assassin. After asking for the details, Klein deliberated and asked,
We met Nast and his Black Emperor on the way here. In the recent months, matters involving you, Senor, Tracy, and Nast have happened in this area of the sea. This is rather abnormal.
4 out of the 4 kings and 7 admirals had involved themselves in the Rorstead Sea in a short span of time. This wasn't even including the recently recruited Tarot Club member, Admiral of Stars Catilia. In terms of probability, this was indeed quite abnormal. Of course, Klein had some theories, but he wished to see if Vice Admiral Iceberg was able to provide some fresh insight. Edwina listened without saying a word. She pulled the edge of a fishing net and held it in front of her. She took out a fountain pen, a brass dagger, metallic bottles, and other things from her pockets and the inner section of her belt, and placed them on the spread-out net. They latched on firmly without moving. It didn't seem like there would be any interaction between them. At this moment, Edwina bent over and picked up a rock used to press down the net, and she placed it in the middle of the open net. The net immediately depressed, causing the surroundings to contract. The fountain pen, dagger, and bottles tumbled towards the center and gathered beside the rock. Edwina explained simply.
It's probably something like this. Some unknown existence has appeared in the net of fate and is pulling us towards it.
Klein thought as he nodded.
This is like an actual model of the law of convergence for beyonder characteristics.
With regards to this, he was both enlightened but puzzled as well. He was enlightened because Edwina's explanation was nearly the same as his guess, but he was puzzled because it couldn't be used to analyze the problems.
The King of the Five Seas Nast appeared because of me. Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy can also be barely explained, since I did come into contact with Trissy Cheek. As for Vice Admiral Iceberg and Admiral of Blood, I can't find a reason. Perhaps it's purely a coincidence. Besides, it's the latter that attracted the former out.
Klein retracted his gaze and asked about something else. Then he said,
Ma'am Captain, is there a reason for inviting me here?
Edwina gave him a deep look and said,
Your identity indicates that you came from Backland. According to what I know, this identity isn't authentic enough. There's no powerful bounty hunter named Gehrman Sparrow from there.
Klein didn't panic as he smiled calmly.
The faction backing you is very powerful. Furthermore, it has quite an extensive network in Backland. You managed to so quickly notice a problem with my identity. Everyone will have some secrets.
Edwina remained silent for a few seconds without pressing the issue. She then said,
Not long before Calvetua died, you sacrificed something to it.
Klein turned his head slightly and swept his gaze across Danitz, who was drinking beer. Cough! Cough! Alarmed, Danitz spewed the beer all over himself. Klein retracted his gaze and didn't deny or admit it as he looked at Vice Admiral Iceberg, Edwina. Edwina continued without a change in expression.
After Calvetua died, the sea god is still replying to its believers.